Chapter 12. Everything Blood. I have to address 7th grade. Unbeknownst to me, the one-room schoolhouses were dissolved, and we had a bunch of new classmates at the start of the year. This was great. There were so few of us, we got bored with one another. We lived so far apart, and the girls rarely had anything to do after school, so someone would have to pick them up, and we never really got to know each other. It was evident after the first day the other students had been getting a better education than the rest of us. The kids who joined us were not happy about this situation and missed their cozy little schoolhouse close to home. But the government knew better and insisted they join the regular school in the condemned building we enjoyed. Now they could ride the bus for hours a day and learn less. I bet the parents were thrilled. 7th grade was considered high school. We now attended school in the far end of the building from the cafeteria past the elementary classrooms. My dad had installed the tile in the gym and the locker rooms when he was young, so the school was old. The other school called our locker rooms the snake pit and would travel back home to shower. The main hallways had terrazzo floor, but the rest was wooden plank flooring. The school had been condemned years before, but we continued to use it. The old graduation pictures hung on the walls, dating back into the 30s. During those years, we wore mini skirts and knee-high socks. If we were lucky, we had saddle shoes to go with the outfit. Argyle was all the rage. I hated 7th grade. I felt so exposed. I had started growing boobs in the 5th grade, and a boy had spied my boobs in a gap in my armless dress. My favorite armless dress. So I started wearing t-shirts under all my clothes. By 7th grade, I was developing a little more and feeling really exposed. I knew not to even say the word bra near my mother. She and Marilyn had a big fight over buying bras. She didn't even call them bras. To her, they were brassieres, and Marilyn was not going to get a brassiere. During a fitting for cheerleading outfits, another mom told Mother it was time and shamed her into buying Marilyn a bra. I think I was a 34D before she relinquished and brought her last daughter a bra. This created all sorts of consternation. The school handbook spelled out the dress codes, and most important word in this was dress. Only dresses were allowed. No pants for the girls. Don't care it's snowing sideways. No pants for the girls. Playing at lunch. No pants. Marching in the band. No pants. 7th grade was dominated by sexuality, and not my sexuality, but a man's and their need to be pleased with your appearance. Stimulated, if you will. I didn't understand what was happening. Why did I have to wear those clothes? I asked my dad, why couldn't they just change the dress code? I started asking that in 1st grade when they made me take off my snow pants from under my dress. I froze all day. Again and again over the years, I would ask my dad if they could just change the words to relieve the pressure. Oh, we didn't have money for extras like nylons, so if you ran your nylons, which was extremely easy to do, you wore them with runs or you wore knee socks. With the knee sock designs, it was hard to find one pair that matched each other, let alone your skirt, and that created more problems. Plus, we were taxed with just going upstairs and finding something to wear. I couldn't wear any of my brother's old clothes or shoes. Marilyn left when I was 8, and if I touched anything of Jane's, she would flip out. Clothes were always a problem after Mother quit sewing for me in 3rd grade. Mother said to me one day, "Did you find that book upstairs?" I said yes. "Good," she said, and that, my dear, was my sex education, a pamphlet that explained menstruation. You get more information in a tampon packet nowadays. Many of my friends had started their periods but did not speak to me about this. They all knew I was far behind in development, and we all held our secrets close. It was their time, not mine. One of the heavier set girls had started in the 3rd grade. The schools did nothing to help us. The Kotex machines were almost always empty or broken, and most of us, if not all of us, were barred from using tampons, as they were the work of the devil. Mother and her generation were well versed in keeping of the secrets. You joined the club when you started menstruating and not a moment before. That was their secret society, and they honored it. These were the years of Miss Twiggy, 85 pounds of sass and beauty. We all wanted to be like Miss Twiggy. Mini skirts and flowing blouses, high cheekbones, and short cropped hair were all the rage at the time. Unfortunately, we did not have any place to shop except Heinemann's general store, and they did not have mini skirts. But I could sew. My mother was a great seamstress, and I learned a great deal watching her sew. After her mother died, her grandmother would take wealthier city family members' clothes and refashion them for the girls. I think Mother learned a lot from that. Anyway, she never really sat and taught me, but I learned a lot nonetheless. When we got to home economics class and started to sew, I was ahead of the pack. This worked against me, as Mrs. Miller would far rather be in the teacher's lounge than in the classroom. The first day she said to me, "You can sew, right?" I said yes, and she said, "Good, show the other girls," and off she went. We were to make skirts. Most of the girls had a strong idea of the work and got right to it. I had made a skirt and was busy hand sewing the hem. One girl did this also, but with white thread on a black skirt. She was not the best hand sewer, so each time she made a stitch, some of the white showed through the front. We all knew this would kill her grade, so I showed her how to use a magic marker to color the thread each time it showed through. We deceived the teacher, and she got a good grade. My dad had taught me this trick, as he had used it on a pair of dress pants he had. The dry cleaners over to Carol were pretty good and had removed the ink and exposed the white patch underneath. The man felt terrible he had ruined my dad's pants. Dad said he struggled with having the man buy him a new pair of pants or confess to the trickery. He confessed, and they had a good laugh over it. Anyway, I learned the trick, and we used it that day to avoid a bad grade. Being a teacher for the day had its benefits, and that day we needed the space to save ourselves from humiliation. Terry was having a bad period and had filled her plastic chair with blood as we sat and sewed. The school was no help. But we were resourceful, and we got her clean and new clothes before the teacher arrived. Why we couldn't ask the teacher for help, I do not know or remember. I do remember we could smell the teacher's crotch. She would sit man spread style, and no one would take the first few chairs in front. She also only wore one dress per week. If you could not remember what we had on Monday, all you had to do was survey the front of her dress, and you could see from the stain from Monday and be reminded of the menu. Why she taught home economics, I will never understand. Her house was a mess. She dressed like a pig and generally slopped around. They never had any money, and their car was a mobile garbage dump. But that's what you got in a small farm community. We were basically a dumping ground for poor teachers, doctors, and preachers. Once in a while, we would get a shining star that would get stuck in Kingston for a year, but that was the exception, not the rule. Okay, back to the damn dress code. We were required to wear skirts and nylons. Notice I didn't say pantyhose. They had not been invented yet. We used nylons and garter belts. I wanted to grow up and wear nylons so bad, but then discovered they were an instrument of torture. The little clasp that held the nylons to the garter belt would detach and fall on the floor. They also dug into your leg, creating a sore spot. Who knew? Nowadays, I see a garter belt as only a bedroom toy. It was a sexualized piece of clothing, but for us it was a required wardrobe. Next time you see a 7th grader, envision her with a mini skirt, and underneath the skirt a garter belt and nylons, a flowing blouse, no bra. That was the hell I was living. One day I was in government class, and one of the clasps on the nylons fell on the floor right beside my desk. I was horrified. I was in Mr. Bebo's class, and he was a friend of my brother Robert. He felt a camaraderie with me that I did not feel. He totally creeped me out, and I just trusted him. If he saw the garter, I knew he would pick it up and dance around the room with it, humiliating me. He teased me constantly, and his favorite tease was about my big nose. I really did not like him, but pretended I did, because again, he was my brother's friend. I finally devised a plan to drop my pencil and then pick up both pencil and the clasp at the same time, thus avoiding his antics. It worked. I got my nylon properly attached and made a half-hearted attempt to learn something that day. On the way out the door that day, a hinge fell on Janet, or maybe Jeanette's head. It hit her hard. It could have killed her, but besides the knot on her head, she was deemed fine. We had been using the shop students for maintenance on the building, but the union scoffed about schools doing this as it took jobs away from working men. That may have been true, but afterwards we had to stop using the shop students. We had no maintenance, and we kids paid the price. Well, If nylons and garter belts were not horrifying enough, let's add menstruation. Let's shorten the skirt up and up, add a belt to the garter belt, and attach a boat to your crotch using another newfangled belt. Who in the fuck invented this stuff? This new belt held a plastic piece with a hole with these tiny little teeth-type things that would catch onto each end of the Kotex pad so you could straddle it, wear it, or ride it. I was never sure. It felt like a boat in your crotch. The material was shiny and not absorbent, or at least not absorbent enough until it was saturated. And of course, by that time, your underwear and pants were probably, and the chair probably, were also saturated. The other design element I loved was the sandpaper effect of the pad. While you walked, it wore away your skin, caught and pulled out your new hairs, and created a nice environment for diaper rash. The contraption was also creep up your backside until it resembled more of a tail and was not between your legs at all. Then, somehow, in the middle of the hallway or behind a set of lockers, you would have to reposition the boat. Ride it differently. I tried using the imagery of a saddle, but the boat adds the element of wet and soggy, which is what you were for the day, the week, or even 10 days. They were also incredibly hard to sit on. You sort of rolled back and forth on the pad, which would have been fun if it had not been for the shame associated with any good feelings from down below. My mother hated talking about anything body-orientated and hid all the menstruation products from me until I actually had blood rolling down my legs. I don't think the woman ever understood needing an adjustment period. One day, getting close to starting my period for the first time and maybe suffering from a little PMS, I chased Mother around the dining room table with her holding a box of Kotex in a paper bag. I kept asking, "What's in the bag, Mother?" She kept saying, "Nothing," again. "What's in the bag, Mother?" I persisted, moving around the table, trying to snatch the bag. She scooted this way and that, holding the bag above my head. I started laughing, which pissed her off, and she marched off into the bathroom. Can you imagine she persisted, not telling me what was in the bag, and I was 13 years old? When I finally started my menstruation, using Mother's pronunciation, she had not one supply in the house for me. Honestly, I thought she was going to roll up a washcloth and shove it in my underwear. I was beyond humiliated. Then she got this bright idea that we would go with Eleanor and drive to one of the little country stores in Wilmot and buy supplies. Not her, but we. We? I'm bleeding, remember? I don't want to go. I want to hide in the bathroom, hang my ass over the tub or the toilet. I do not want to ride 3 miles up to a store and announce to the whole world that I am bleeding right now down my leg. Oh, God, someone help me, please. As I look back, the men in town could be cruel in small but mischievous ways. In the Kingston IGA, the personal care products were displayed over the top-loading freezers, the old kind, not the stand-up display freezers you see nowadays. You had to reach over the freezer and then up to the boxes of pads or plugs. Of course, for most women, this was an impossible situation, and we would have needed a stool. When you couldn't reach something, you had to ask, or as it really felt, you had to announce that you needed pads or plugs and what size you wanted. That's assuming they stocked different sizes. Now, Wilmot was another trick. There you actually needed a ladder. I was bleeding and they wanted me to go on a ladder and choose something I had never really touched, experienced, or understood. Trial by fire, I told you this would be easy. I intrinsically understood not to touch the Tampax, whatever they were. I chose a box of pads. Mother paid, and we left. I caught Mother having an argument about something with Jane, about what she had in her upstairs drawers that made Jane cry. Mom was madder than a hatter. I snuck up later to find 20 or more Tampax under a stack of sweaters. Wow! Now I had to figure out what they were, and I stole the instructions to read later. Inside? Inside? You put them inside? Where? I read those instructions a million times, learning every nuance of the words and drawings. When I got brave enough to put hand cream on one and shoved that puppy up there, and voila! No more smell, no more diaper rash, no more readjusting of the boat, and it eliminated one belt. Oh, happy day. Then I just had to figure out how to get them without Mother knowing. Never attempted or even thought to ask Jane how she acquired her Tampax. I have a friend, and I won't mention her name, but she shoved that puppy up the wrong hole and left it there all day long. The adults could be so cruel with their restriction of information. Did I mention we called Tampax plugs at the time? Information was restricted with no internet and the old women controlling the books in the library. So there was no information available, and it was impossible to learn anything your parents did not want you to learn. I knew more about cow reproduction than human reproduction. Have you seen the gloves they use for cow insemination? You can look it up. I'll wait. I was babysitting for my neighbor one day. She came home pretty mad after visiting her friend in the hospital. Her friend had just delivered another child and asked her, in a Margaret Sanger type of moment, "Where do they come from and how do I make them stop?" My neighbor told me that, and I didn't know what it all meant, but I was going to find out. During high school, many girls just disappeared. During our last weeks in high school before graduation, even more girls dropped out. The class behind us was even worse. Even though my sister had gotten pregnant, I still did not really put everything together, and I didn't understand pushing the girls out of the home just because they got pregnant. I did think Mother's story of her friend having one baby and then another baby 3 months later was probably false. I was pretty sure that could not happen. I eventually figured out her daughter had the second baby and they just claimed it as their own. But they kept the baby and the daughter, and I thought that was the right thing to do. Statistically, there are lots of incest in the area, so maybe it was all in the family anyway. I had another friend whose name I can't remember. She was so smart and lively. During 5th grade, she started to dry up. She became quite withdrawn. Slowly, you hardly noticed her, and then she disappeared. We never knew why, but as an adult, I think maybe we do know. I'd love to track down each and every one of my schoolmates and have a cup of coffee. One of my friends had a fairly rough existence on a dirt road far from school. I was there once. There was no lawn per se, and it had lots of broken down cars and tractors strewn about. I remember the proverbial dog chained to the tree barking as we pulled in, and I ran into her house. The house was mainly open with rough sawn, wide planked flooring. This flooring catches dirt and is impossible to sweep, so it looks like you have dirt floaters after the first year or so. There was a wood stove in the corner, a single bed pushed up close, and maybe 2 living room chairs that were, to say the least, filthy. At the other end of the small ranch were 2 small bedrooms that were not completely walled off from the living room. Carolyn was a sweet young woman with long flowing hair that she was not allowed to cut or even trim, as it would be an affront to God. She was one of the girls who disappeared just before graduation. Years later, she told me of her disappearance. She had come home from school to find a young man in the living room, and her dad said she was to go on a date with him. He looked nice enough, so she got ready and off they went. This was really isolated country. Bean and cornfields as far as the eye can see, with a farmhouse sprinkled here or there. Large groupings of trees, creeks, and little farm lanes everywhere. This young man found a farm lane in a cornfield about 50 feet down the road and pulled into it. There he started to kiss and grope my friend. She tried to stop him, but he reminded her that her dad said she was to date him, and this is what you do on a date. So she let him. Her period stopped, and she was moved to the south before graduation day. I've always wondered the importance to these fathers to get their girls married before graduation. Is it to restrict them to being good housewives? Otherwise, what was their motivation? She had a happy ending, though, divorcing that man and marrying another loving and caring soul. They opened a little restaurant and raised her boy. She seemed really happy and relieved her childhood was over. Who wouldn't? I know I wanted my childhood to be over. My dad would ask me once in a while, "How long before I graduate, and when can I go?" I told my 2nd grade teacher that we would graduate in 1972, and she looked at me for the longest time and said, "You are the first one to figure that out." I could feel her feelings for me as I sat there wishing my life away. Oh, back to 7th grade. I think you realize by now that we had to make or find our own action in Kingston. It was along about then that a couple boys took me to, wait for it, a place so foreign to a city kid that I am laughing as I type. We rode our bikes to the north end of town to find a small framed wooden structure with a small viewing deck. This building served as the local slaughterhouse. Oh, you need entertainment? Let's go to the slaughterhouse. There's lots of action in the slaughterhouse. I must say I learned a lot about slaughtering an animal. Pigs go in a hot water bath both in the proverbial sense and the literal. The men had a huge trough in the corner and placed the pig into the hot water. The cows were hung and gutted upside down, being careful not to cut into their stomach bowel system. As far as today's standards go, they were killed very humanely. The men understood keeping the animals calm and not having adrenaline released during the kill. It changes the taste of the meat. I'm not sure it was the most sanitary workroom, though. Most of the meat went down to Legs Meat Market and was further butchered for the meat case. All the meat would be consumed within days of slaughter. I remember it being the best and most flavorful. You could make roasts without adding any flavor. Nowadays, I even add flavoring to sloppy joes because I think the beef is so bland. Don't even get me going on chickens. For me, at the time, it was all about the blood. Everywhere I looked was more blood.